Some people think money makes problems disappear until it brings them back louder. The rain tapped softly against the tall glass windows of Whitmore House, each drop sliding down like a quiet countdown. Inside, everything was still. Polished marble floors. Low golden light. The kind of silence money could buy. Daniel Whitmore sat alone at the corner table, his Swiss watch catching the dim glow as he checked the time for the third time in under a minute. 9:42 p.m. Late. He didn't like late. He didn't like anything that slipped out of schedule, out of control. Across the room, Clara Hayes moved between tables with measured steps, her black uniform crisp, her posture steady. She didn't rush. She never rushed. Even when the room was full, even when voices rose and glasses clinked, she carried herself like time moved around her, not through her. "Another sparkling water, sir?" she asked, her voice calm, almost neutral, like she was offering a fact, not a question. Daniel didn't look up right away. He finished typing the last line on his phone, hit send, then placed it face down on the table. Only then did his eyes meet hers. For a second, something shifted. Not recognition. Not interest. Just a pause. "You've been watching the door," she added quietly, already reaching for the glass. Daniel leaned back slightly, studying her now. Most people filled silence with apologies or nervous smiles. She didn't. She simply stood there, waiting, as if she had all the time in the world. "I don't pay you to observe me," he said, his tone even, not harsh, just dismissive. Clara nodded once. Of course. No reaction. No defensiveness. Just acceptance. She poured the water with steady hands, the soft sound of liquid filling glass the only thing between them. Daniel watched her for a moment longer than necessary. There was something off about her. Not her appearance. She looked like any other waitress in the room. But her stillness, it didn't match the job. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly. "Clara." "Clara what?" "Hayes." He gave a small nod, like filing it away, though his expression didn't change. Around them, conversations continued, low and distant, like background noise in a world that didn't concern him. He picked up the menu, glanced at it without really seeing it, then set it down again. "Bring me the usual," he said. "Medium rare. No substitutions." "Yes, sir." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Wait." Clara paused. Not tense. Not hesitant. Just still. Daniel reached into his jacket, pulled out a sleek leather wallet, and slid a crisp stack of bills onto the table. It landed softly, but the weight of it was clear. $10,000. He didn't look at the money. He looked at her. "Take it," he said. "And don't come back to my table tonight." A beat. Then another. The rain outside grew slightly heavier, tapping faster against the glass. Clara's eyes dropped briefly to the stack, then back to him. No surprise. No confusion. Just a quiet understanding, like she'd seen this before. "Is there a problem with the service?" she asked, her voice unchanged. Daniel exhaled slowly, almost amused. "No problem," he said. "I just prefer simplicity." The word hung there, clean and sharp. Clara nodded once. She reached down, not hurried, not reluctant, and picked up the money. Her fingers didn't tremble. She didn't count it. She didn't question it. She simply held it for a second, then tucked it into her apron. "Understood," she said. No edge. No emotion. Just clarity. Daniel gave a small, satisfied nod and leaned back in his chair, already turning his attention away, as if the matter was closed. As if she was already gone. But Clara didn't move right away. For a fraction of a second, she looked at him. Not at his suit. Not at the watch. At him. And there was something in that look. Not anger. Not hurt. Something quieter. Something deeper. Then it was gone. She turned and walked away, her steps just as steady as before, disappearing into the soft blur of the restaurant like she had never been there at all. Daniel picked up his glass, took a slow sip, and checked his watch again. 9:45 p.m. Back on schedule. Everything, exactly as it should be. Or so he thought. The next morning arrived without ceremony, just a pale gray light slipping through the glass towers of Manhattan, quiet and indifferent. Daniel Whitmore stood in his office on the 42nd floor, looking down at the city that moved because people like him decided it should. Traffic flowed in steady lines. Screens lit up across buildings. Deals were already being made before most people had their first coffee. Everything. In motion. Everything predictable. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt, the fabric crisp against his skin, then reached for his tablet. The schedule was full. Back-to-back meetings. Investors. Legal. Expansion reviews. Nothing unusual. Nothing unexpected. Exactly how he liked it. By mid-morning, the memory of the night before had already faded into something insignificant, a minor transaction in a life built on much larger numbers. $10,000. It was not even a rounding error. He did not remember her name right away. Clara. It returned only when his assistant mentioned the restaurant, confirming his reservation for the following week. "Do you want the same table, Mr. Whitmore?" she asked. "Yes," he replied without looking up. "And the same staff?" A brief pause. He considered it for less than a second. "No, that will not be necessary." The answer came easily. Clean. Final. By noon, the conference room was filled with quiet voices and polished confidence. Suits in shades of navy and charcoal. Laptops open. Numbers projected on a large screen. Daniel stood at the head of the table, one hand resting lightly against the back of his chair, the other scrolling through data with precise movements. "If we shift the allocation by 3%, he said, his voice steady, controlled, "we reduce exposure without losing momentum." Heads nodded. Pens moved. No one interrupted. No one questioned. This was his world. Order. Logic. Control. But just as he reached the final slide, something small flickered across the screen. For a fraction of a second, the presentation froze. Then it corrected itself. No one else seemed to notice. Daniel continued without hesitation, but his eyes lingered a moment longer than necessary. After the meeting ended, the room emptied quickly, leaving behind the faint scent of coffee and expensive cologne. His assistant stepped forward with a tablet in hand. "You have a message," she said. "Marked urgent." Daniel took the tablet, already expecting another negotiation, another request, another problem that could be solved with a decision and a signature. The message was short. No greeting. No sender name. Just a single line. "You forgot something." He stared at it for a moment, his expression unchanged, but something in his posture shifted. Subtle. Almost invisible. He tapped the screen. No additional information. No attachment. Just the line, sitting there like it belonged. "Trace it," he said, handing the tablet back. His assistant nodded. Of course. The rest of the afternoon moved forward as planned. Calls were made. Contracts reviewed. Numbers approved. But the message stayed in the back of his mind, quiet but persistent, like a sound you could not quite locate. By 5:30, the office had begun to thin out. The city outside shifted from sharp daylight to the softer glow of evening. Daniel finally allowed himself a moment of stillness, standing again by the window, his reflection faint against the glass. His phone buzzed once. Then again. A new email. No subject this time. He opened it. A file. Small. Unlabeled. He hesitated for half a second, then tapped it. The screen filled with data. Clean. Structured. Familiar. Too familiar. His eyes moved quickly, scanning lines, numbers, timestamps. Then slower. More carefully. His jaw tightened just slightly. These were internal records. Not public. Not accessible. Not supposed to be seen outside a very specific circle. And yet, there they were. Not complete. Not enough to cause damage on their own. But precise. Intentional. Like someone was showing him just enough to prove they could show everything. Daniel set the phone down on his desk, his fingers resting beside it. He did not speak. He did not call anyone. For the first time that day, he was not moving forward. He was thinking. The office was silent now. The kind of silence that did not belong to control, but to something waiting. He reached for the phone again, scrolling back to the message. "You forgot something." This time, the words felt different. Not vague. Not random. Directed. Personal. His mind moved quickly through possibilities. Competitors. Internal leaks. Legal pressure. None of them fit. This was too deliberate. Too quiet. And then, almost without warning, a small detail surfaced. A moment. A look. Not the money. Not the conversation. The pause before she walked away. Clara. The name settled into place with unsettling clarity. Daniel exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the city below, but no longer seeing it. For the first time in a long while, something had entered his world without permission, and it was not asking to be removed. By 7:30 that evening, the city had fully shifted into its other rhythm, softer lights, longer shadows, the quiet hum of conversations replacing the sharp edges of daytime urgency. and Daniel Whitmore was still in his office, the same file open on his screen, unchanged, untouched, yet somehow heavier with every passing minute. He had not forwarded it. He had not called legal. He had not even asked his assistant for the trace results again. Instead, he sat in silence, one hand resting against his chin, eyes fixed on the numbers that should have been impossible to access. The clock on the wall ticked once. Then again, each second precise, measured, indifferent. His phone lit up. Another message. Same unknown sender. This time, no text. Just a timestamp. 3 days ago. 9:42 p.m. Daniel did not need to think long. He remembered exactly where he had been. The table. The rain. The moment. His gaze shifted slightly, almost involuntarily, as if the memory had weight. A second later, another file appeared. He opened it without hesitation now. Security footage. Grainy but clear enough. The restaurant floor. Tables. Movement. And there she was. Clara. Walking away from his table. But the video did not stop there. It followed her. Not directly. Not obviously. Different angles. Different cameras. A hallway. A service door. The back exit. She did not rush. She did not look back. She stepped outside into the rain, paused just briefly under the awning, and then she looked up. Not at the building. Not at the street. At the camera. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his expression tightening for the first time. It was not fear. It was recognition. That look. It was the same one from the night before. Calm. Certain. As if she already knew this moment would matter. The video ended. Silence returned. Daniel sat back slowly, his fingers tapping once against the desk before going still again. This was not random. This was not luck. This was intentional. His phone buzzed again. A single line appeared. You prefer simplicity. The words settled into the room like they belonged there. Daniel exhaled quietly, almost a soundless laugh, but there was no amusement in it. Just clarity. He stood up, walking toward the window, the city stretching out below him in endless grids of light. For years, he had built a system where every variable was accounted for, every risk calculated, every outcome anticipated. People were patterns. Situations were equations. And everything could be reduced to a decision. Until now. He turned slightly, looking back at the desk, at the screen still glowing. With data that should not exist outside his control. His assistant stepped in softly, as if sensing the shift in the room. We traced the messages, she said carefully. They are routed through multiple layers. No direct source. Whoever sent them knew exactly how to avoid detection. Daniel nodded once. Not surprised. And the restaurant? He asked. The employee records? She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Clara Hayes resigned the morning after your visit. No forwarding address. No references. It is as if she disappeared. The word lingered between them. Daniel's gaze did not change, but something behind it sharpened. Disappeared. That had been the instruction. Clean. Simple. Paid for. He turned back to the window, his reflection faint in the glass, overlapping with the city beyond. No one disappears, he said quietly. Not a belief. A fact. His assistant remained still, waiting. Find everything, he added. Not just records. Patterns. Connections. I want to know where she came from. Yes, sir. She left without another word, the door closing softly behind her. Daniel remained where he was, the city lights flickering like distant signals. For the first time, the balance had shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly, but enough. Enough to feel. Enough to matter. His phone buzzed one more time. He did not move right away. Then slowly, he reached for it, his fingers steady, his expression composed. A new message. No file this time. Just a sentence. You paid for silence. You got attention. Daniel stared at the words, the faint reflection of them mirrored in his eyes. And for the first time since this began, he did not dismiss it. He did not reduce it. He did not control it. He simply understood. Somewhere out there, beyond the systems he trusted, beyond the patterns he built, someone had seen him clearly, and chose not to disappear. The next morning did not wait for answers. It arrived the same way it always did. Sharp light cutting through the skyline. Schedules already moving before most people were fully awake, and Daniel Whitmore was already in motion, dressed, composed, every detail exactly where it should be. Except now, there was something else beneath the surface, something quieter, something he could not organize into a system. By 8:15, his office was active again, assistants moving with quiet efficiency, screens lighting up, calls beginning, but Daniel was not. At his desk, he stood in the private elevator, descending instead of rising, his reflection steady in the mirrored walls, eyes focused, not rushed, but deliberate. When the doors opened, he stepped into the lobby without hesitation, his presence shifting the atmosphere without a word, people noticing, adjusting, making space. Outside, the air was cooler, a faint breeze moving between buildings, carrying the distant hum of the city waking up. His car was waiting, of course, door already open. Whitmore House, the driver asked. Daniel paused for half a second. Then no. The restaurant. The drive took 12 minutes. He did not check his phone. He did not review documents. He simply watched the city pass by, each block familiar, predictable, and yet somehow less certain than it had been the day before. When they arrived, the restaurant was not yet open for service. Chairs were still being arranged. Lights adjusted. The quiet version of a place that would later be filled with noise. Daniel stepped inside, without waiting to be greeted. The manager looked up immediately, surprise flickering across his face before professionalism replaced it. Mr. Whitmore, he said, straightening his jacket. We are not open yet, but if you would like to sit, Clara Hayes. Daniel interrupted, his tone calm, not raised, but final. I want to know everything you have on her. The manager hesitated, not out of defiance, out of uncertainty. She no longer works here, he said carefully. Yes, Daniel replied. I am aware. Silence stretched for a moment, thin but noticeable. The manager glanced briefly toward the back office, then back at Daniel. She was quiet, he began. Kept to herself. Always on time. Never caused problems. Daniel's expression did not change. That is not everything, he said. The manager shifted slightly, as if adjusting under a weight he could not fully explain. She did not stay long, he added. A few months. Maybe 4. She did her job well. Customers liked her. That is all. Daniel stepped closer, not aggressively, but enough to close the space between them. People do not send me internal data they should not have, he said evenly. If they are just doing their job. The words were quiet, controlled, but they landed. The manager swallowed once, then nodded. There was one thing, he admitted. She asked questions. Daniel waited. About the building, the cameras, the way the systems worked. Nothing inappropriate. Just curious. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus. And you told her? The manager hesitated again. Some of it. Basic things. She said she was interested in how large operations run. I did not think, he trailed off. He did not need to finish. Daniel turned away slightly, his gaze moving across the empty dining room, the same space where everything had seemed so simple just days before. Tables, chairs, light. In a moment he had dismissed without thought. His phone buzzed softly in his hand. He did not need to check it immediately. He already knew. Still, after a second, he looked down. A new message. A single image. He opened it. A floor plan. Not of the restaurant. Of his building. Detailed. Marked. Specific points highlighted in subtle red. His grip on the phone did not tighten, but something in his posture shifted again, almost imperceptibly. This was no longer about curiosity. This was precision. The message beneath the image appeared a second later. You always look down from the top. Daniel's eyes moved slowly from the screen to the room around him, then back again. For years, he had built his advantage on perspective, seeing everything from above, controlling from distance, removing emotion from equation. But this was different. This was someone who had stepped into the system itself. Someone who had watched, learned, waited. The manager was still speaking, something about schedules, about records, but Daniel was no longer listening. The room felt quieter now. Not empty, just observed. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and turned toward the exit. If she contacts you, he said without looking back, you will tell me. Of course, the manager replied quickly. Daniel stepped outside again, the city now fully awake, louder, faster, unchanged on the surface. His car door opened. He did not get in immediately. Instead, he looked up, toward the glass towers rising above him, toward the office where everything had always made sense. Then slowly, he sat down, the door closing softly behind him. For the first time, the height did not feel like control. It felt like exposure. The car ride back felt longer than it should have. Even though the route had not changed, Even though the city moved with the same predictable rhythm, traffic lights switching on schedule, pedestrians crossing in steady lines, everything functioning exactly as designed. And yet Daniel Whitmore sat in the back seat with a stillness that did not belong to routine, his gaze fixed not on the buildings passing by, but somewhere beyond them, as if the structure he trusted had shifted just enough to be noticed. When he stepped back into his office, the temperature felt the same, the lighting unchanged, the quiet precision of his environment intact, but the space no longer felt neutral. It felt watched, not in a literal sense, not yet, but in a way that suggested awareness. He moved to his desk, setting his phone down with deliberate care, then remained standing for a moment, as if measuring something invisible. His assistant entered shortly after, tablet in hand, her posture composed, but her eyes sharper than usual. "We found something," she said. Daniel did not respond immediately. He simply looked at her. "Clara Hayes is not her original name," she continued. "There are records, but they do not align. Different states, different employment histories. Nothing consistent. It is as if she rebuilt herself more than once." Daniel's expression remained controlled, but his attention narrowed. "Education?" he asked. "Fragmented," she replied. "Community college records under one name. Then a gap. Then a certification in data systems under another. Nothing high profile, but enough to suggest technical skill." Daniel walked slowly around his desk, each step measured, each movement precise. "She asked about cameras," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "And systems?" "Yes," the assistant confirmed. "And she would have understood enough to map basic infrastructure." Daniel stopped. Not abruptly. Just complete stillness. The pieces were beginning to align, not in a way that created panic, but in a way that removed the illusion of coincidence. This was not random curiosity. This was preparation. His phone buzzed softly against the desk. Neither of them moved at first. Then Daniel reached for it, his hand steady, his expression unchanged. A new message. No greeting. No explanation. Just a short video. He opened it. The image appeared instantly. His building lobby. Recorded from an angle that was not part of the official security system. Subtle. Slightly elevated. Not obvious unless you knew where to look. The timestamp read early morning. Before most employees arrived. A figure entered the frame. Simple clothing. Neutral colors. A cap pulled low. But the movement, the posture, unmistakable. Clara. She walked through the lobby without hesitation, without looking around, as if she belonged there. As if she had always belonged there. She paused near the elevator bank, not pressing any buttons, not interacting with anyone, just observing. Then, slowly, she looked up. Not at the ceiling, not at the lights, at the camera. The video ended. Silence followed. Daniel lowered the phone slightly, his gaze fixed on the blank screen for a fraction longer than necessary. His assistant spoke carefully. "That angle is not from our system." "I know," Daniel replied. His voice was calm. Too calm for someone who had just confirmed that an unknown variable had entered his controlled environment. He placed the phone down again, his fingers resting lightly against the edge of the desk. "She is not hiding," he said. "She is positioning." The words were not a question. They were a conclusion. The assistant nodded slowly, understanding the implication without needing it explained. "What would you like me to do?" she asked. Daniel did not answer right away. He turned slightly, looking out at the city again, the same skyline that had always represented certainty, control, dominance. But now, there was something else layered beneath it. Something quieter. Something patient. "Nothing reactive," he said finally. "No alerts. No system changes. If she is watching, I want her to keep watching." The assistant hesitated, just for a moment. "That carries risk." Daniel gave a small nod. "So does underestimating someone twice." The room fell quiet again, the kind of silence that no longer belonged to routine, but to awareness. His phone buzzed once more. This time, he did not hesitate. He picked it up immediately. A single line appeared. "You built a system to keep people out." A second later, another line followed. "I learned how to walk through it." Daniel's eyes moved slowly across the words, his expression unreadable, but something behind it had shifted completely now. Not control. Not yet. But something closer to respect. Not for what she had done. For how she had done it. He set the phone down gently, almost carefully, as if the weight of it had changed. Then he spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a clarity that carried through the room. Set up a meeting. His assistant blinked once, surprised. With who? Daniel's gaze remained steady, fixed on nothing and everything at the same time. She already knows, he said quietly. And for the first time since this began, he was not waiting for the next move. He was inviting it. The message did not arrive immediately, and that was the first confirmation Daniel Whitmore needed, because silence, when it was intentional, always carried more weight than noise, and by late afternoon the office had settled into a quiet tension that no one could quite name, screens active, calls ongoing, everything moving. But beneath it all there was a pause, as if the system itself was waiting for something to resolve. Daniel remained at his desk, not distracted, not impatient, just still, his hands folded lightly in front of him, his eyes occasionally shifting to the phone resting beside a stack of untouched reports. He had cleared his evening. No meetings, no calls, no interruptions. That alone was unusual enough to be noticed, though no one commented on it. At exactly 6:10, the phone buzzed once. No hesitation this time. He picked it up immediately. A location. No explanation. No greeting. Just an address. Midtown. 11 blocks away. A place he recognized, not because it mattered, but because it did not. A public space. Neutral. No advantage. Daniel read it once, then set the phone down again. His assistant stood near the door, waiting without speaking. Cancel everything else, he said calmly. Already done, she replied. He gave a small nod, then reached for his jacket, slipping it on with the same measured precision that defined every movement he made. Nothing rushed, nothing uncertain. But as he walked toward the elevator, there was a difference now, subtle, almost invisible, a shift from control to engagement. The drive was shorter this time, the city already transitioning into evening, lights reflecting off glass and pavement, the air carrying a faint chill. When the car stopped, Daniel did not wait for the driver. He stepped out on his own, the street alive but not crowded, people moving past without noticing him, without adjusting. For once, he was just another figure in motion. The location was a small cafe on the corner, understated, the kind of place people chose for quiet conversations, not for display. He entered without hesitation. The bell above the door chimed softly, a small, ordinary sound that felt almost out of place in a situation that had become anything but ordinary. He scanned the room once. Tables. 2 near the window occupied. 1 near the back. And then he saw her. Clara Hayes sat alone at a corner table, a simple cup of coffee in front of her, untouched. No uniform now. No indication of the role she had played days before. Just stillness. She did not look surprised to see him. She did not stand. She simply watched him approach, the same calm presence, the same quiet certainty that had unsettled him from the beginning. Daniel stopped across from her, his posture relaxed but deliberate. You chose a public place, he said. Not a question. Clara tilted her head slightly. You prefer controlled environments, she replied. I prefer balance. He considered that for a moment, then sat down without asking. The chair made a soft sound against the floor. The space between them was small, not physically, but in a way that mattered more. You have my attention, Daniel said. Direct. Efficient. Clara's eyes held his for a second longer than expected. Not challenging. Not yielding. Just steady. You had it before, she said quietly. You just chose not to see it. The words landed without force, but they did not need it. Daniel did not react outwardly, but something behind his gaze sharpened. You accessed internal systems, he said. You mapped infrastructure that is not public. Clara did not interrupt. That is not curiosity, he continued. That is intent. She nodded once. Yes. No denial. No hesitation. Just agreement. Daniel leaned back slightly, studying her, recalibrating something that had once felt simple. Why, he asked. A single word. But this time, it was not dismissive. It was precise. Clara's fingers rested lightly around the coffee cup, though she did not lift it. Because you made it easy, she said. Systems built to keep people out often forget to account for the ones already inside. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in recognition. You were never just a waitress, he said. Clara gave the smallest hint of a smile. Not proud, not amused, just acknowledging. No, she said. Silence followed. Not awkward, not tense, just real. The kind of silence where both sides understood more than they were saying. Daniel leaned forward slightly now, his voice lower, more focused. You could have done damage, he said. Clara met his gaze without flinching. I did not, she replied. That was a choice. Another pause. This one heavier. Because that was the difference. Not capability. Not access. Choice. Daniel exhaled slowly, the smallest shift in his posture, signaling something deeper than control. Something closer to respect. Then tell me what you want, he said. Clara's eyes did not move. You already gave it to me, she answered. Daniel frowned slightly, just enough to show he was no longer fully certain. $10,000? He asked. Clara shook her head once. No, she said softly. A reason to come back. The words settled between them, quiet, precise, undeniable. And for the first time since this began, Daniel Whitmore realized that the moment he thought he had ended something was the moment it had truly started. Daniel did not answer immediately, not because he did not have one, but because for the first time, the answer he would give actually mattered, not as a transaction, not as a move, but as something that could not be taken back once spoken, and that alone shifted the balance of the room in a way he had not experienced in years. The cafe remained quiet around them, the soft hum of low conversations, the faint clink of ceramic against wood, ordinary sounds continuing without pause. But at their table, time felt, slowed, as if both of them had stepped slightly outside of it. You came back with access, Daniel said finally, his voice even, controlled, but no longer dismissive. You came back with leverage. Clara watched him, her expression unchanged, but there was a subtle shift in her eyes, not challenge, not defiance, something closer to acknowledgement. I came back with clarity, she replied. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his fingers resting against the edge of the table, the movement deliberate, measured. Clarity about what? Clara lifted her cup this time, taking a small sip, unhurried, as if the question did not require urgency. When she set it back down, her gaze returned to him, steady as ever. About how easily people confuse control with understanding, she said. The words did not rise. They did not press, but they stayed. Daniel's jaw tightened just slightly, not from anger, but from recognition. You think I do not understand my own system? He asked. Clara shook her head once. I think you understand how it works, she said, but not how it fails. Silence followed again, but this time it carried weight. Not tension, not discomfort, just truth settling into place. Daniel exhaled slowly, leaning back now, his posture shifting from confrontation to evaluation. Then explain it to me, he said. Clara did not respond immediately. She looked out the window for a brief moment, watching the reflection of the city in the glass, then back at him. You built layers, she began. Access points, permissions, redundancies. Everything designed to prevent external threats. Daniel nodded slightly. Correct. But you did not design for internal invisibility, she continued. For someone who does not trigger alerts because they are not trying to break in. They are already inside. Watching, learning, waiting. Daniel's eyes narrowed again, not defensively, but analytically. And you were doing that, he asked. Clara met his gaze without hesitation. I was paying attention, she said. Another pause. This one sharper. Because the distinction mattered. Daniel tapped his fingers once against the table, then stopped, as if even that small movement had become unnecessary. You could have sold that information, he said. You could have used it to force something bigger. Clara gave a slight tilt of her head, considering the statement, then shook it off gently. That would have been easy, she said. And predictable. Daniel's expression shifted just enough to show interest. So instead, he said, you chose this. Clara's lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile, but close enough to suggest understanding. I chose to see what you would do when you were not the one in control, she said. The words landed clean. No embellishment. No drama. Just truth. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, longer than he had allowed himself to look at anyone in a very long time. Not assessing. Not calculating. Just seeing. And what did you find? He asked quietly. Clara did not hesitate this time. That you adapt faster than most, she said. But you still assume the game is yours. Daniel's gaze held hers, steady, focused, but there was something new beneath it now. Not certainty. Not dominance. Something closer to curiosity. And it is not, he asked. Clara's expression softened just slightly, not with sympathy, but with clarity. It never was, she said. Another silence. This one deeper. Because it was not just a conversation anymore. It was a shift. Daniel leaned back fully now, his posture relaxed, but his mind sharper than it had been all day. Then why meet me? He asked. Why not stay invisible? Clara looked at him for a moment, then down at her cup, her fingers resting lightly against the rim. Because invisible people do not change anything, she said softly. She looked back up, her eyes meeting his again, steady, unwavering. And I did not come back to disappear. The sentence hung in the air, simple, direct, impossible to misinterpret. Daniel exhaled slowly, a small shift in his expression revealing something he rarely showed. Not defeat, not surrender, but acceptance of something he could not reduce to a number or a decision. So what happens now? He asked. Clara did not answer right away. She simply studied him for a moment, as if measuring not his words, but his understanding. Then, quietly, she said, that depends on whether you are still trying to control this, or finally ready to understand it. And for the first time since the conversation began, Daniel Whitmore did not have an immediate answer. Daniel did not rush to fill the silence, and that alone marked the difference. Because for most of his life, silence had been something to control, to dominate, to end with a decision, but now it stretched between them without pressure, without urgency, and for the first time, he allowed it to exist without trying to shape it. Outside the cafe window, the city continued as it always did, lights reflecting across passing cars, people moving with purpose, unaware that at a small corner table, something far more significant than a transaction was unfolding. Daniel leaned back slightly, his gaze steady, but no longer fixed in the way it had been before. Understanding requires information, he said finally, his tone quieter now, less about asserting, more about aligning. And you have been selective with yours. Clara did not react immediately. She simply watched him, as if weighing not his words, but the space between them. Then she nodded once. Yes, she said. Because information without context creates the same problem as control without awareness. Daniel's lips pressed together briefly, not in disagreement, but in consideration. Then give me context, he said. Clara's eyes softened just slightly, not with emotion, but with clarity. She reached into her bag, slow, deliberate, and placed a small, thin folder on the table between them. It was unmarked. No label. No indication of importance. Daniel looked at it, then at her. What is this? He asked. The part you have not been shown yet, she replied. He did not open it right away. Instead, he studied her for a moment, as if confirming something unspoken. Then, carefully, he slid the folder toward himself and opened it. Inside were documents. Not dramatic, not alarming at first glance. Just records. Internal memos. Authorization logs. Dates. Signatures. His eyes moved quickly at first, then slower, more focused. Patterns began to form. Not errors. Not breaches. Adjustments. Small changes. Quiet approvals. Decisions made under layers of authority that all traced back to one place. Him. Daniel's fingers paused on one page, his expression unchanged, but something behind it shifted again, deeper this time. These are internal approvals, he said. Standard operations. Clara nodded slightly. Yes, she said. They are. He turned another page. Then another. Each one similar. Small. Controlled. Justified. But together, they created something else. Not a single flaw. A pattern of blind spots. Daniel closed the folder halfway, his hand resting on it, his gaze lifting slowly back to her. You are showing me my own system, he said. Clara met his eyes without hesitation. I am showing you where it stopped asking questions, she replied. The words settled heavier than anything she had said before, because they were not about access, not about control. They were about assumption. Daniel exhaled slowly, leaning back again, the folder still open in front of him, its contents no longer just data, but reflection. You think I missed this, he said. Clara shook her head gently. I think you trusted it, she said. Silence followed again, but this time it carried something different. Not tension, not distance, recognition. Daniel looked down at the folder once more, then closed it fully, his fingers resting on top of it for a brief moment before he let go. And what does this change? He asked. Clara did not answer immediately. She leaned back slightly in her chair, mirroring his earlier posture, her expression calm, but her eyes steady. That depends on what you do with it, she said. Daniel's gaze remained fixed on her, but there was no challenge in it now. No need to assert. Only a question that mattered more than the ones before. "And what would you do?" he asked. Clara considered the question, not quickly, not casually, but with the same measured presence she had shown from the beginning. "I would not fix the system," she said finally. Daniel's brow tightened slightly. "Then what?" Clara's voice remained soft, but clear. "I would change how it sees people inside it." The statement lingered, quiet but undeniable. Daniel did not respond right away. He looked at her, really looked at her, not as a variable, not as a threat, but as something he had not accounted for. Not because she was unpredictable, but because she did not play by the assumptions he had built everything on. "You are asking me to rebuild perspective," he said. Clara gave a small nod. "Yes." Another pause, but this one felt different. Not uncertain, not unresolved, just open. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table now, not as a barrier, but as an anchor. "And where do you fit into that?" he asked. Clara's lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile, but enough to suggest something deeper. "I do not," she said. Daniel's eyes narrowed, just a fraction. "Then why bring this to me?" Clara held his gaze, steady, unwavering. "Because you are the only one who can see it, and actually change it," she said. The words did not carry pressure. They did not demand. They simply existed as truth. Daniel sat back slowly, the weight of the folder no longer in his hands, but in his understanding. For years, he had built systems to prevent disruption, to maintain control, to eliminate uncertainty. And now, sitting across from someone who had stepped through all of it without force, without noise, he realized something he had never needed to consider before. The system had never been challenged from the outside. It had been understood from within, and that was something he could not ignore. Daniel did not move right away after she finished speaking, not because he did not understand, but because understanding, real understanding, had a different weight than anything he had dealt with before, and it did not respond to speed. It required stillness, the kind he had spent years avoiding by staying ahead of everything. The cafe around them continued as if nothing had shifted. Quiet conversations, soft music, the steady rhythm of a place that did not know it had just become the center of something far larger than itself. Daniel's eyes dropped briefly to the closed folder on the table, then back to Clara, and for the first time, there was no calculation in his gaze, no attempt to place her into a category he could control, just a clear recognition of what she represented. "You are walking away from this," he said finally, his voice calm, but carrying something deeper now. Clara nodded once. "Yes." No hesitation, no second thought, just certainty. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table, not as a move, not as a tactic, but as something closer to grounding. "You could stay," he said. "You understand the system better than most of the people who built it." Clara's expression did not change, but there was a subtle shift in her eyes, not resistance, not temptation, just clarity. "That is exactly why I should not," she replied. The words landed without force, but they held. Daniel studied her for a moment, longer than necessary, longer than he would have allowed in any other situation. "Because you do not trust it," he said. Clara shook her head slightly. "Because I do not need it," she said. Silence followed, but this time it was not heavy. It was resolved. Daniel sat back slowly, exhaling a breath he had not realized he was holding, his gaze shifting briefly toward the window, the city still moving, still functioning, still built on the systems he had created. But something had changed. Not out there. In here. He looked back at her, and there was something different now, something he had not offered before. Not authority, not control, respect. "You could have exposed everything," he said quietly. Clara nodded once. "Yes." "And you did not." "No." Another pause. Short, clear. Daniel's voice softened slightly, not in weakness, but in understanding. "Why?" Clara did not look away. "Because destruction is easy," she said, "and you would have learned nothing from it." The answer stayed between them, simple, direct, undeniable. Daniel gave a small nod, the kind that did not signal agreement, but acceptance. "So this," he said, gesturing lightly toward the folder. "This is your version of accountability." Clara's lips curved just slightly again, that same almost smile that never fully revealed itself. "No," she said softly. "This is your opportunity." The distinction mattered. Daniel understood that now. He glanced down at the folder one last time, then pushed it slightly closer to himself, not as possession, but as acknowledgement. And if I ignore it? He asked. Clara's expression remained calm, but her eyes held something firmer now. Not threat, not warning, just truth. Then nothing changes, she said. Except that now you know. The words settled with a quiet finality. Because knowledge, once seen, could not be unseen. Daniel leaned back again, his posture no longer rigid, no longer fixed, just present. You did not come back for the money, he said. Clara shook her head. No, you did not come back for leverage. No, Daniel held her gaze, steady, clear. You came back to be heard. Clara considered that for a brief moment, then gave a small nod. Yes. No embellishment. No hesitation. Just truth. Another silence followed, but this one felt different from all the others. Not a pause. Not a gap. An ending. Clara reached for her cup, now empty, her fingers resting lightly against it for a second before she stood, her movements the same as they had always been, measured, calm, unhurried. Daniel did not stop her. He did not ask another question. He did not try to extend the moment. He simply watched as she picked up her bag, her presence already beginning to shift from something immediate to something remembered. Clara, he said, not loudly, but enough to reach her before she turned away. She paused, looking back at him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel said, You were right. The words were simple, unadorned, but they carried more weight than anything else he had said. Clara held his gaze for a second longer, then gave the smallest nod. Not victory, not satisfaction, just acknowledgement. Then she turned and walked away, her steps steady, disappearing into the quiet flow of the cafe, just another person leaving, unnoticed by everyone except the one who had finally seen her clearly. Daniel remained at the table for a moment longer, the folder still in front of him, the city still moving outside, everything unchanged on the surface. But inside, something had shifted permanently. He reached for the folder, not with urgency, not with hesitation, but with intention. And as he stood to leave, one thought settled quietly into place, clear and undeniable. Some people do not disappear when you ask them to. They return as the truth you can no longer ignore.